Clara Morgan never planned to start over at 32, but life didn't ask for permission. After years of hiding bruises under makeup, she finally left Marco, her drunk and violent husband. Now she was rebuilding. Steady job, quiet apartment, and a boss who noticed more than he ever said. Adrian Voss, a self-made millionaire, had everything except peace. He ran his empire with precision, but every time Clara smiled across the office, something shifted inside him. No one knew it, but he had been secretly in love with her since the day she walked into his company. He never crossed a line, never spoke a word, until the night her past came storming back through those glass doors. What happened next would change them both forever. A protective boss forced to reveal his heart, and a woman who would finally learn what safety felt like. Sometimes, the most dangerous kind of love is the one that's been silent all along, and tonight, silence wouldn't be enough. It was late, and Clara was still at her desk, eyes fixed on the glowing screen. She'd gotten used to staying late. It felt safer than going home to an empty apartment. Her fingers moved fast over the keyboard, but her thoughts wandered to the bruises that were finally fading. She told herself she was fine now, free. Still, freedom didn't feel as peaceful as she expected. Adrian Voss noticed she hadn't left yet. From his office door, he watched her for a moment, trying not to make it obvious. She always kept her head down, polite, professional, never personal. But tonight she looked different, tense, distracted. He wondered if she'd slept properly since coming back from her vacation. He approached her desk casually, hands in his pockets. "You know it's almost midnight," he said with a half smile. Clara looked up, surprised but calm. "Guess I lost track of time," she replied, her tone neutral, almost rehearsed. He nodded, knowing there was more behind that answer. He wanted to ask what was really wrong, but stopped himself. She had walls, strong ones, and he respected that. "Go home, Clara. I'll have your report in the morning," he said. "Sure, Mr. Voss," she answered, packing up her bag. But as he turned to leave, her phone started ringing, and the look in her eyes froze him in place. The phone buzzed once, sharp enough to make Clara jump. She answered quickly, lowering her voice out of habit. "This is Clara," she said gently. The guard's voice sounded nervous. "Sorry to bother you this late, ma'am, and there's someone here asking for you." She forced a small smile, even though he couldn't see it. "It's okay, Steve. Who is it?" There was a long pause on the other end, just the sound of his breath and the faint radio static. "He says his name is Marco Morgan." Her throat went dry. For a second, she didn't answer. She just stared at her reflection in the dark window. "Thank you," she whispered finally, trying to steady her voice. "Please, don't let him come up." Her words came out calm, polite, but her fingers were shaking against the phone. From his office, Adrian watched her through the glass wall. He couldn't hear what she was saying, but her body language said enough. The tension in her shoulders, the way her hand hovered near her chest. Something in his chest tightened. He'd seen that look once before, the night she returned from leave pretending to be fine. Without a word, he grabbed his jacket from the chair, his movements sharp and deliberate. Downstairs, the lobby lights reflected off the polished floor as Clara stepped out of the elevator. Marco was already there, disheveled, red-eyed, smelling of whiskey and anger. "You really thought you could just disappear?" he slurred, his voice echoing in the empty space. She stayed calm, voice trembling but steady. "You need to leave, Marco," he sneered, stepping closer. "You're not walking away from me that easy." His hand reached out, ready to pull her back into the life she ran from. Before he could touch her, another voice sliced through the tension like a blade. "That's far enough." The sound was calm but carried weight. Command. Marco turned, startled, as Adrian stepped forward from the service elevator, coat still in hand, eyes locked on him. The whole room shifted. Even the guard froze. Clara exhaled for the first time in seconds, her fear replaced by something else, relief. Adrian didn't say another word. He didn't need to. For a second, no one moved. The air between them was thick, heavy, and ready to break. Adrian stepped closer, eyes cold, posture unshaken. "You should leave," he said, his tone even but dangerous. Marco let out a short laugh, the kind that comes before trouble. "And who the hell are you supposed to be?" "I'm the man telling you this conversation is over," Adrian replied, voice low. He didn't raise it. He didn't need to. His calm was louder than any threat. Clara stood frozen behind the reception desk, clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles went white. The guard stepped forward but stopped when Adrian lifted a hand slightly, signaling him to stand back. Marco's face twisted with a mix of anger and humiliation. "You think you can just steal her away?" "You have no idea what she's done to me," he shouted. Clara flinched, tears stinging her eyes, but she stayed silent. Adrian's jaw flexed, his patience thinning. "What she's done," he said quietly, "is survive you." That line landed harder than any punch could. Marco's expression faltered, his drunken confidence breaking just enough for the guard to grab his arm. Adrian didn't look away until Marco was being escorted toward the exit, still yelling her name. When it was finally quiet again, Clara's legs felt weak. Adrian turned to her, his voice softer now. "You're safe now," he said, though they both knew safety was just temporary. The silence after Marco was taken away felt heavier than the shouting. Adrian stepped closer to Clara, keeping his voice steady. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. "He didn't hurt you, did he?" She shook her head, still pale but holding herself together. "I'm fine," she said softly, though her trembling hands told another story. Adrian turned toward the head of security, his tone sharp but controlled. "This doesn't leave the building," he said. "No reports, no gossip. I want full confidentiality. Tonight never happened." The guard nodded quickly, understanding exactly what was at stake. "Yes, sir. Understood." Adrian waited a moment, making sure the message landed before he turned back to Clara. "You should sit down," he said, his voice softer now. She obeyed, lowering herself onto one of the lobby chairs, clutching her coat like it could protect her from more than just the cold. Adrian knelt slightly in front of her, his usual distance gone. "You don't have to say anything," he murmured. "Just breathe." For a moment, the woman who always looked composed finally let her guard slip, just a little. When she looked up at him again, her eyes were full of questions she couldn't voice. "You can't go home tonight," he said, already taking out his phone. She hesitated. "Adrian, He cut her off gently. "I'll handle it. Just trust me." And for reasons she couldn't explain, she did. Outside, the sound of thunder rolled in, echoing the storm that hadn't quite passed. The rain had already started by the time they reached the glass doors. The building behind them glowed cold and empty, as if the chaos inside had never happened. Clara's heels clicked softly against the marble floor as they walked, her silence heavy but composed. Adrian kept close, scanning the street like instinct, not habit. "Your car's still in the garage," he said. "Leave it here tonight." She stopped, confused. "What?" "I can drive home," she said, though her voice didn't sound convincing even to herself. Adrian shook his head. "Not a chance. He's drunk, unpredictable. If he's still out there, I'm not letting you walk into another scene like that." His tone was calm, but it wasn't a suggestion. She hesitated, looking at the rain as if it held the answer. Then she nodded once, quietly. "Okay." They stepped outside together, the city lights reflecting on the wet pavement. Adrian pressed a button on his key fob, and a black car pulled up from the curb, headlights cutting through the mist. He opened the passenger door without a word. Clara blinked, startled by how natural he made it seem. "You don't have to," she started, but he cut her off gently. "Yeah, I do." It wasn't romantic. It was certainty, and somehow that felt safer than promises ever had. She slid into the car, still clutching her bag like a shield. Adrian walked around to the driver's side, shaking the rain from his hair before getting in. Neither spoke as the doors shut, sealing them inside the quiet hum of the city. He glanced at her briefly. Her eyes were tired but steady. "Buckle up," he said softly, starting the engine. And with that, they left the building behind, but not the night. The city glistened through the rain as Adrian drove, one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting loosely near the gear shift. Neither of them spoke at first. The hum of the tires filled the silence. Clara watched the lights blur past her window, her pulse slowly catching up to reality. She was safe, but her mind was still in that lobby. "You didn't have to do that," she said finally, her voice quiet but firm. Adrian glanced at her, half amused, half frustrated. "Sure I did. HR would kill me if I let one of my employees get kidnapped in the lobby." Clara let out a short, nervous laugh, small but real. The sound caught him off guard. For a second, Adrian's grip on the wheel loosened and the corner of his mouth lifted. Seeing her smile after everything felt like a win he didn't know he needed. They stopped at a red light, reflections of neon signs dancing across the windshield. Clara folded her arms, glancing at him from the corner of her eye. "You're not used to people telling you no, are you?" Adrian smiled faintly. "I've learned to take rejection well, as long as it doesn't come with police sirens." She laughed again, softer this time. The sound filled the quiet car like a fragile kind of peace. When the light turned green, he shifted gears smoothly. "You can rest now," he said. "You're safe." She looked at him, uncertain whether to thank him or argue. In the dim glow of the dashboard, he looked calm, almost unreadable, except for the way his jaw tightened every time she flinched at a passing sound. She didn't know it yet, but this wasn't just a rescue. It was the moment Adrian stopped pretending he didn't care. The elevator ride up was quiet, the kind of silence that said more than words could. Clara's reflection in the mirrored walls looked calm, but she kept fidgeting with the strap of her purse. Adrian stood beside her, giving her space, though every instinct told him to make sure she didn't fall apart. When the doors opened, she stepped out first and stopped short. The view hit her like a wave. The city stretched beneath them, endless lights against the rain. "This is where you live?" she asked softly. Adrian nodded, slipping his hands into his pockets. "Temporary headquarters," he said, as if the penthouse wasn't worth mentioning. She let out a quiet breath, still taking it in. Glass walls, soft lighting, the faint smell of coffee and rain. "You didn't have to bring me here," she said, her voice low. "I couldn't think of anywhere safer," he replied simply. It wasn't charm, it was fact. He walked toward the kitchen, grabbed a clean towel and handed it to her without meeting her eyes. "Guest rooms down the hall. Fresh sheets, extra blankets," he said. "And before you ask, no, I don't usually have company." She managed a faint smile. "Didn't think you did." The tension between them had shifted, still present but softer, like a storm moving offshore. As she disappeared down the hallway, Adrian stood by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. He told himself this was about protection, responsibility, but deep down he knew better. He had seen fear in her eyes before, but tonight, for the first time, she'd looked at him with something else too, trust, and that somehow was more dangerous than anything Marco could do. The city glowed beneath the glass walls, streaks of rain sliding down like threads of silver. Clara sat on the edge of the couch, still wrapped in the towel he'd given her, staring at nothing in particular. Her breathing had slowed, but her mind was racing. It was strange. She should have felt exposed, being in her boss's home, but instead, she felt safe, safer than she had in months. Adrian stood in the kitchen, pretending to read an email that had long lost his attention. He kept glancing at her reflection in the window, watching her shoulders finally relax. She looked tired but alive, and that to him was enough for tonight. "There's coffee, tea, or something stronger," he said lightly, trying to sound casual. "Coffee's fine," she replied with a faint smile, her voice steady again. He poured 2 cups and handed her one, keeping a respectful distance as he sat across from her. "You ever think you'd end up spending your Friday night in your boss's living room?" he asked, tone dry but teasing. She chuckled softly. "Can't say it was on my calendar." The sound of her laugh hit differently, quiet but genuine. For a man used to boardrooms and silence, that small laugh felt louder than applause. They sat there for a while, no words, just the sound of rain and the quiet hum of the city below. Clara traced the rim of her cup, her eyes lost in the view. "Thank you for tonight," she said finally. He nodded, meeting her gaze for a moment longer than he should have. "Get some rest," he said. "You're safe here." As she stood to leave, he caught himself watching her again, not out of curiosity but out of relief, and maybe something he didn't want to name yet. The first thing Clara noticed was the quiet. No pounding heart, no raised voices, just the soft hum of the city beyond the glass. She stretched slowly, realizing she was still in the guest room of Adrian's penthouse. The sheets smelled faintly of fresh linen and coffee. Her eyes landed on the closed door, and for a moment she hesitated to step out. Then she remembered she was safe here. Walking into the living room, she stopped when she saw it. A folded note resting beside a steaming mug and a small tray of toiletries laid neatly on the counter. Toothpaste, a new toothbrush, and a bottle of rose-scented soap. The note read in Adrian's clean handwriting, "There's coffee waiting. Use what you need. A driver will take you to the office and stop by your apartment first so you can change. I've gone ahead. See you at work." A quiet smile formed on her lips as she read it twice. The gesture was thoughtful, efficient, very him. She poured herself coffee, the aroma grounding her after a night that had felt like a movie she hadn't agreed to star in. Taking a sip, she leaned against the counter, eyes catching the skyline beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. For the first time in weeks, the world didn't seem like a threat. When the intercom buzzed, she answered softly. "Ms. Morgan?" "I'm downstairs," said a calm voice. The driver. She glanced once more at the note before folding it carefully into her purse. "I'll be right down." As she stepped into the elevator, the morning sun hit her face, warm and steady. Somewhere between the scent of coffee and the quiet hum of the city, Clara realized she was finally breathing again. The office looked the same, too bright, too quiet, but something in the air had shifted. Clara walked in with her usual composure, coffee in hand, pretending her pulse wasn't racing. A few curious eyes followed her, whispers passing like static through the open floor. She smiled politely, kept her head high and went straight to her desk. Everything felt normal again, or at least it should have. Adrian was already in his office, mid-meeting, suit pressed, expression unreadable. When she walked by his glass door, he looked up just once. It wasn't a long look, but it was enough to stop her for half a second. The kind of look that said, "I saw you get through it, and I'm not done protecting you yet." She blinked, forcing herself to keep walking. The last thing she needed was the office rumor mill starting up. By noon, everything looked like business as usual. Reports, phone calls, deadlines, the same rhythm, but now every sound seemed sharper. When she handed him a folder during a quick briefing, their hands brushed lightly. He didn't react, just said, "Good work," in that steady tone that always carried more weight than the words themselves. But his eyes lingered a moment too long before he turned away. Clara sat back at her desk afterward, typing notes that didn't need typing, just to stay busy. She wasn't sure if she wanted to thank him or forget the entire night. Across the glass, Adrian adjusted his cufflinks, pretending not to notice her reflection on his window. But every time someone mentioned her name, his attention flickered. He'd kept her safe once, and he already knew he'd do it again if he had to. By Friday, the tension had turned into something quieter. Not awkward, just charged. They'd kept things professional, but even professionalism had limits. So when Adrian passed her desk before lunch and said, "Come with me," she didn't argue. No tone, no explanation, just that calm authority that somehow didn't feel like an order. She followed, half curious, half wary. The restaurant was nearby, sleek, quiet, full of polished surfaces and people pretending not to listen. Clara sat across from him, setting down her phone carefully. "You could have warned me this wasn't the cafeteria," she said dryly. Adrian smirked. "Would you have come if I had?" She gave a small laugh, the same kind that had disarmed him days ago. He didn't say it, but seeing her smile again felt like progress. For a while they talked about work, numbers, meetings, nothing personal, but between the lines, something unspoken kept surfacing. When she mentioned the late nights, he asked if she was still having trouble sleeping. The question was casual, but his tone wasn't. "I'm fine," she said. "Don't worry." He raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like a lie." She rolled her eyes, but the corner of her mouth curved upward. As they left, the rain had started again, light and steady. He walked beside her, close enough to notice the shiver she tried to hide. "Still think I overreacted that night?" he asked. "Maybe just a little," she teased. "But I'll admit, your timing was good." He smiled faintly, holding the door open for her. "Timing's everything," he said. She didn't know it yet, but for him, that was more confession than joke. On the other side, determined and angry eyes were silently watching the two. The office was quiet except for the steady rhythm of rain against the glass. Clara sat alone, finishing the last report of the night, her reflection faint in the window. Her phone buzzed once beside the keyboard, lighting up the dark desk. She glanced at the screen. One line of text made her blood run cold. "You think he can protect you forever?" Her breath caught. With a quick tap, she turned the screen off, forcing herself to stay calm. The elevator doors opened softly behind her. Adrian stepped out, sleeves rolled up, scanning the room. "You're still here?" he asked, walking toward her desk. Clara stood quickly, grabbing the printed folder. "Just wrapping up," she said, her tone too casual. He frowned slightly, noticing the tremor in her voice. "You should call it a night," he said gently. She nodded, avoiding eye contact, and started gathering her things. When she turned toward the printer, her phone buzzed again. The same tone, sharp in the quiet room. Adrian glanced toward her desk just as the screen lit up. Another unknown message flashing across it. He didn't move closer, didn't touch it, but the single line he glimpsed before the light faded was enough. His jaw tightened, his usual calm slipping for half a second. Something was wrong, and she was trying to hide it. As she walked past him toward the elevator, he said only, "Send me that report in the morning." His tone was even, but his mind was already racing. When the doors closed behind her, he picked up the folder and exhaled slowly. Within minutes, he was texting security. "Assign someone discreet near the east exit. She's not to leave alone." He didn't need to see the rest of the messages to know. Someone had crossed a line. Clara arrived earlier than usual, determined to stay invisible, at least to him. The office was calm, the usual rhythm of typing and phones starting up for the day. No one suspected anything. To everyone else, it was just another morning. She sat at her desk, eyes fixed on her screen, pretending the familiar tension in her chest didn't exist. She'd promised herself she'd keep things strictly professional. No distractions, no conversations that went beyond work. But Adrian had a way of cutting through every plan she made. She'd just opened her email when his voice came from across the floor. Calm, deep, and leaving no room for choice. "Clara, my office. Now." Her heart sank, though her expression stayed composed. She walked in, steady steps, holding her coffee like armor. The blinds were half closed, the air inside his office sharper than usual. "I had the number traced," he said, without preamble. The words hit harder than she expected. "Excuse me," she managed, caught off guard. Adrian leaned forward on his desk, his tone firm but not angry. "The messages. I didn't read them, but I wasn't about to ignore what I saw last night." Clara blinked, heat rising to her face. "You had no right," she said quietly. "You didn't ask," he replied, "and I didn't need to. Someone's trying to rattle you." She exhaled slowly, dropping the defensive tone. "You can't just take over my life every time something happens." "I'm not taking over," he said evenly. "I'm making sure you don't face it alone." She studied him for a long moment, the weight of his words hanging between them. "You ever stop to think you might be the one who's in too deep?" He smiled faintly. "I stopped thinking about that the first time you smiled at me." Her breath caught, not because of the line, but because he meant it. And for the first time, she didn't know what scared her more, Marco's threats or Adrian's honesty. The silence stretched just long enough to make her uncomfortable. Adrian leaned back in his chair, studying her with that calm, unreadable look that somehow made her nervous. "So," he said finally, "we're doing this the hard way." Clara crossed her arms, a spark of defiance in her eyes. "There's always a hard way with you," he smiled faintly. "That's because the easy way never works." She sighed, shaking her head. "What exactly are you suggesting, Adrian?" "Protection," he said simply. "Discreet, efficient and non-negotiable." She arched a brow. "You make it sound like a business deal." He shrugged. "Everything's a deal if you sign it." That earned him a reluctant smirk. "Fine," she said, "but don't expect me to hide behind you every time something happens." "I wouldn't dare," he replied smoothly. "You'd probably push me out of the way." For a moment, the tension eased, replaced by something almost playful. "You really think you can handle me?" she asked, her tone teasing but her eyes steady. "I've run entire companies," he said. "How bad could one woman be?" She laughed softly, a real laugh this time, and for the first time in days, the air between them felt light. But beneath that laugh, both of them knew it wasn't over. It was just starting. As she stood to leave, he said quietly, "I'll have someone follow your route home for the next few nights." "Don't argue." She stopped at the door, glancing back at him. "You realize you sound like a movie villain when you say stuff like that." He smiled without looking up from his papers, only the charming kind. She rolled her eyes and walked out, but the corner of her mouth betrayed her. She was still smiling when the elevator doors closed. The night was quiet, city lights reflecting off the wet asphalt as they drove through the downtown streets. Clara leaned her head slightly against the window, finally starting to breathe easier. Adrian had insisted on driving her home after a late meeting, for efficiency, he'd said, but she knew better. His definition of efficiency usually meant control. For once, she didn't mind it. Halfway through an empty intersection, she noticed headlights in the mirror. Same distance, same rhythm, every turn they made. Her stomach tightened. "That car's been behind us since the bridge," she said quietly. Adrian glanced in the rearview mirror, expression unreadable. "You're sure?" "Pretty sure," she replied, voice steadier than she felt. "It's been matching our lane changes." He didn't hesitate. His hand shifted the gear, tone calm but clipped. "Buckle up." The light ahead turned yellow and he accelerated smoothly, merging into traffic before cutting right onto a narrower street. Clara gripped the door handle, eyes darting to the mirror. The car followed, closer now. "Adrian," she started, but he was already calculating their next move, his focus absolute. "Don't look back," he said. "Just breathe." The rain began to fall harder, turning the windshield into streaks of color. Adrian maneuvered through the slick streets like it was muscle memory. Clara's pulse raced, but his voice stayed even. "We'll lose him in 2 turns, he said. "You sound awfully confident," she muttered. "I've done this before," he answered, a ghost of a smirk in his tone. She turned to him, surprised. "I really hope that's a joke." "Not exactly," he said, and pressed the gas. The rain turned the streets into mirrors, each reflection blurring into streaks of white and red. Adrian's hands stayed steady on the wheel, as the car slid through the slick turns, engine humming low. Clara's pulse echoed in her ears, but she couldn't look away from him. The calm in his face, the precision in every move. "You really have done this before," she said, trying to sound casual. "Long story," he replied. The car behind them pushed harder, headlights flashing through the rain. Adrian cut through a side street, barely missing a delivery truck. "He's still on us," Clara said, breath sharp. "He won't be," Adrian answered, downshifting as they entered a tight corner. The tires skidded, water spraying across the windshield. For a heartbeat, everything was sound and motion, and then silence as the other car missed the turn completely. Adrian slowed down gradually, eyes still on the mirror. The pursuer's car was gone, swallowed by the maze of city lights. Clara let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "Do you always drive like this?" she asked. "Only when someone's trying to kill me," he said dryly. She gave a shaky laugh, the kind that comes after fear breaks. He glanced at her, a quick look, steady and grounding. "You okay?" "I think so," she whispered. For a few seconds, neither spoke. The only sound was the rain hitting the roof and their uneven breathing. Then Adrian said softly, "You trust me now." She turned her head, meeting his eyes in the dim glow of the dashboard. "Against my better judgment," she said. His lips curved slightly. "Good, that's a start." As they merged back onto the main road, the chase was over, but something deeper had already begun. The car slowed as they left the main avenue, the rain still falling in steady sheets. Adrian's eyes stayed on the road, calm and focused. Clara glanced out the window, realizing this wasn't the route to her building. "You changed the way," she said quietly. "I did," he replied. "We'll stop by your apartment, grab what you need, and you're staying at the safe unit tonight." His tone left no room for argument. She didn't try to make one. They parked outside her place just long enough for her to collect a small suitcase and a few essentials. The hall lights flickered, the silence unnerving. When she stepped back into the car, rain dripping from her hair, Adrian was waiting with the heater already on. "It's not safe there for now," he said simply. She nodded, clutching her bag. There was nothing to add. He was right. And for once she didn't feel the need to prove otherwise. The rest of the drive was quiet, the tension slowly dissolving into exhaustion. She glanced at him sideways, still processing how naturally he took control when everything fell apart. "Do you ever get tired of being in charge?" she asked softly. He gave a short laugh. "Only when someone listens the first time." She smiled, shaking her head. "So, never." "Exactly," he said, his lips curving just enough to ease the silence. When they finally reached the familiar high-rise, she felt an odd sense of relief. The building's lights glowed against the storm, solid and safe, like a fortress above the chaos. As the elevator doors opened, he handed her his jacket, still warm from the drive. "Same room as before," he said. "Fresh towels are in the closet." She hesitated for a moment, then met his eyes. "You don't stop, do you?" He smiled faintly. "Not when it matters." The following week fell into a rhythm that almost felt ordinary. Clara worked from the apartment the company had temporarily assigned to her, a spotless modern space with a skyline view and silence that bordered on comforting. She'd convinced herself it was just another branch of corporate efficiency. Adrian handled security, HR handled logistics, and she handled her reports. Still, something about how easily it had all been arranged made her wonder. Adrian checked in every morning before heading to meetings across town. Sometimes it was just a quick knock on the door and a reminder to eat something. Other times he stayed a little longer, asking about her work with that effortless tone of command that always sounded like concern in disguise. "You're adjusting well," he said once. "To what?" she asked. "Less chaos," he replied, though his eyes said more. The evenings were the strangest part. He always seemed nearby, calling to review a file, forwarding a report just before she logged off, sending a message that read, "Don't work past midnight." It was efficient, sure, but it also felt personal. She'd shake her head, telling herself not to overthink it. Adrian Voss didn't do personal. He did control, structure, and calm, and that's exactly what she needed. One night, after finishing a late call, she stepped out to the balcony for air. The rain had stopped, leaving the city glowing beneath her. As she looked up, her gaze caught on a faint light through the glass of the upper floor, a familiar silhouette moving near the window above. She frowned slightly, the thought barely forming before she dismissed it. It couldn't be. She was imagining things, right? Clara had settled into a rhythm that almost felt safe. She worked from the apartment during the day, sending reports, joining calls, and pretending it was just another assignment. Every evening, like clockwork, Adrian checked in, sometimes by text, sometimes in person, always brief. It was professional, predictable. Until the night she caught a small, unexpected detail that didn't fit the pattern. The building concierge had called about a delivery mix-up. "A package for Mr. Voss was dropped on your floor again," he said. She frowned. "My floor?" Minutes later, she opened her door and saw two neatly sealed boxes in the hallway, both labeled with Adrian's name and the same penthouse address. Only then, she noticed, her unit number ended in B, his, right above hers, in A. It wasn't coincidence. It never was. That evening, when he stopped by to ask about her project timeline, she watched him differently. His calm, controlled tone, the easy way he reached for the light switch like he'd done it 100 times. It all made sense now. He lived right upstairs. For days, she'd thought the sense of someone watching over her was just paranoia. Turns out, it was literally true. And somehow that realization didn't scare her. It settled her. When she handed him a file, their fingers brushed. Just a second, maybe less, but it lingered. Neither spoke. The silence carried something heavier than words. Something both of them understood but wouldn't name. "You're quiet tonight," he said finally. "Just thinking," she replied. "About work?" he asked, almost smiling. "About proximity," she answered, her voice steady. He didn't reply, but the look in his eyes told her everything. The first sign of trouble came through security. Clara had just finished a client call when her phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number, this time from the building staff. "Ms. Morgan," the guard said, his tone careful. "There's a man outside asking to see you. Says it's urgent." Her pulse tightened instantly. She didn't need a name to know. Only one man still used desperation as a language. She tried to speak, but the words tangled. "Don't let him up," she managed. "Please." The guard hesitated, promising to handle it discreetly. But even as she hung up, she could see the shape of the past pressing at her window, that same restless feeling she'd tried to leave behind. She grabbed her bag, moving toward the elevator, not sure what she planned to do. She just needed air. As the elevator doors slid open, Adrian stepped out, calm, composed, but with something burning behind his eyes. "You shouldn't go down there," he said, voice low. "He's here, isn't he?" she whispered. He nodded once. "And he won't be for long." She started to protest, but he was already on his phone giving short, measured instructions to building security. "Keep it quiet. No scene, no press," he said before ending the call. Downstairs, through the glass lobby doors, Marco paced under the streetlight, half drunk, shouting her name to no one in particular. Clara froze. Adrian moved in front of her, his presence steady as a wall. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. "He doesn't get to scare you anymore." She didn't argue. The moment Marco saw Adrian beside her, his shouting faltered. "You think you can hide behind him forever?" Marco sneered. Adrian didn't blink. "No," he said evenly. "She just doesn't need to run anymore." The elevator ride felt endless. Clara stood beside Adrian, hands clenched, trying to control her breathing. Outside, police lights flickered faintly against the rain-soaked glass. "You called them already?" she asked. "Her friend owed me a favor," he said simply, eyes fixed ahead. When the doors opened, two plainclothes officers were waiting in the lobby, blending in with the crowd like ordinary men. Adrian gave a small nod. The plan was in motion. Marco was pacing near the entrance, shouting her name again. The moment he saw them, his expression shifted, a twisted mix of anger and arrogance. "You really think this ends with a restraining order?" he spat. Adrian didn't respond. Instead, he stepped closer, calm and deliberate. While one of the officers subtly moved behind Marco, Clara stayed a few feet back, heart pounding but steady. This time, she wasn't running. "Marco Morgan," one of the officers said, flashing a badge. "We have a warrant for your arrest. Violation of protective order and harassment." Marco's face went pale, disbelief breaking through his drunken haze. "What? This is insane," he barked. "So you can't just—" "You did this to yourself," Clara said quietly, her voice shaking but strong. He turned toward her, fury flaring again, but before he could move, the officers restrained him. Adrian stood beside her, rain dripping from his hair as the squad car doors shut. "He won't bother you again," he said quietly. She looked up, eyes tired but clear. "How did you—" "You're not the only one who does her homework," he said, managing the faintest smile. For the first time in weeks, Clara exhaled without fear. As they walked back inside, the building lights reflected off the glass behind them, a city finally quiet, a story finally turning the page. The next morning, the office felt different, calmer. Even the usual hum of conversation seemed softer. Clara arrived early, coffee in hand, her first real smile in weeks tracing across her face, as she greeted the receptionist. The weight she'd been carrying was gone, replaced by a quiet strength. When she stepped into her workspace, she found a small note on her desk in Adrian's handwriting. "Welcome back. Try not to scare HR this time." She laughed quietly, shaking her head. A few minutes later, Adrian appeared by her door, sleeves rolled, expression unreadable but lighter than usual. "You're really here," he said. "You sound surprised," she teased. "I thought you might take the day off." "And give you the satisfaction of thinking you scared me?" she replied. He smiled faintly. "Fair point, you've gotten bolder. Maybe I had a good teacher." They went over reports as usual, though the air between them carried an ease that hadn't been there before. Every glance, every small silence felt comfortable now, like two people who'd already seen each other at their worst and had nothing left to hide. When he passed her a file, their hands brushed again, but this time neither looked away. "Don't tell me you planned that," she murmured. "Wouldn't dream of it," he said. As she gathered her things to leave, Adrian called out, "Clara!" She turned, pausing in the doorway. "You did good," he said simply. She smiled, the kind that reached her eyes. "So did you." He watched her walk away, that same calm confidence returning to his face. For the first time, the word safe didn't mean distance, it meant her. And though neither said it aloud, both knew it. Something had changed for good. A week later, Clara stood in the doorway of her new apartment. Smaller, brighter, and completely hers. Boxes lined the walls, sunlight filtering through half-open curtains. It wasn't perfect, but it was freedom in its simplest form. She ran her hand over the kitchen counter, smiling at the faint smell of fresh paint. For the first time in years, the silence around her didn't feel empty. It felt like peace. She was unpacking a stack of books when someone knocked. When she opened the door, Adrian was there. Sleeves rolled, holding 2 coffee cups and an awkward half-smile. "Didn't think you'd survive without decent caffeine," he said. She laughed. "And here I was thinking you came to check on your employee." "That too," he admitted, stepping inside. His presence filled the small space like it belonged there. They talked easily, surrounded by boxes and beginnings. "You did all this alone?" he asked, setting his cup down. "Mostly," she said. "The movers bailed halfway through. Guess even they thought I owned too many books." He smiled. "It suits you." She glanced up. "The chaos?" "No," he said softly. "The independence." For a moment, the air stilled, warm, familiar, unspoken. When he left, she walked him to the door. "You know," she said, "you don't have to keep checking in." He paused, turning just enough to meet her eyes. "I know," he said quietly. "That doesn't mean I'll stop." She didn't answer, just smiled faintly and closed the door behind him. As his footsteps faded down the hall, she leaned against the wall and exhaled, a woman finally standing on her own, with someone willing to stand beside her. The dinner had gone perfectly, contracts signed, smiles exchanged, investors charmed. Clara felt the weight of the past few months lifting with every toast. She and Adrian worked like they always did, sharp, efficient, in perfect sync. When someone asked for a group photo, Adrian handed her his phone. "You've got steadier hands than me," he joked. She smiled, lining up the shot, but as she checked the image, her breath caught. The first photo in his gallery wasn't from that night. It was her, months ago, standing by his office window, lost in thought. She froze for just a second before locking the screen and passing the phone back. The conversation around the table continued, but her mind didn't. That picture wasn't casual. It was careful, chosen, the kind of photo someone keeps because they can't let go. When the guests finally left, the restaurant fell silent. Clara stayed behind, arms crossed, pretending to check her notes. "So," she said lightly, "nice collection you've got." Adrian looked up, frowning slightly. "Sorry? Your gallery," she said, half teasing, half serious. "You might want to hide the evidence better." His expression shifted. The calm CEO replaced by a man suddenly uncertain. He exhaled slowly. "You weren't supposed to see that," he admitted. "Then why keep it?" she asked softly. His eyes didn't waver. "Because I couldn't delete the first thing that made me look forward to coming to work." She blinked, startled by the honesty in his voice. "Since the day you joined the company, He hesitated, then smiled faintly, almost ashamed. "I liked you immediately, but you were married, and you seemed happy. I never crossed that line. But when I saw what he did to you, I promised myself I wouldn't let you face anything like that again." Clara looked down for a moment, trying to steady her breath. The confession wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, raw, and real. "You waited," she said finally. "Yeah," he replied, "and when I finally had a chance to protect you, I wasn't going to waste it." She studied him for a long time, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think that's when everything changed for me too. That night in the lobby, when you stood between me and him, that's when I stopped seeing you as my boss." Adrian's shoulders relaxed, the tension giving way to something softer. "And now?" he asked, almost afraid of the answer. She smiled faintly, eyes locked on his. "Now I see you exactly as you are, a man." For a moment, neither spoke. Then he reached for her hand, hesitant, like a man touching something fragile, and she didn't pull away. Outside, the city lights blurred through the window. Two reflections standing side by side finally caught up to the truth. The restaurant was nearly dark by the time they left. The last of the staff cleared tables in silence, while the city hummed softly outside. Adrian helped Clara with her coat, his hand brushing her shoulder longer than necessary. Neither spoke as they stepped into the cold night, their earlier words still echoing between them. At the car, she turned to thank him, but he was already watching her with that quiet intensity she'd spent months trying to ignore. He didn't ask permission, and she didn't need him to. Their kiss came softly at first, then deeper, unhurried but certain. It wasn't about rescue or gratitude anymore. It was two people who had finally run out of reasons to wait. When they pulled apart, her breath lingered against his. "That explains a lot," she murmured. He smiled faintly. "What took me so long?" "No," she said. "Why I never stopped trusting you." They didn't rush to leave. The drive back to his building was quiet, filled with the kind of peace that comes when everything has already been said. Upstairs, the city lights framed them through the wide windows. The laughter that followed was low, genuine, the sound of a wall finally falling away. What happened after that didn't need words. Only stillness, warmth, and the unspoken truth that had always been there, waiting for its moment. When morning came, sunlight spilled across the bed, soft and golden. Clara opened her eyes to find Adrian awake, watching her with that same quiet focus. Not possessive, just present. "You know this changes everything," she said, voice rough from sleep. "I'm counting on it," he replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She smiled. "You're impossible." "Persistent," he corrected. By the time they arrived at the office, the day had already settled into motion. They didn't hold hands or make an announcement, but people noticed. The way he stood a little closer when she spoke, the easy smiles, the calm that followed them into every room. It was obvious to anyone who'd been paying attention. For once, neither of them cared. Later, as they reviewed a project together, Adrian leaned closer. "You know this might give HR a heart attack," he said. She didn't even look up. "They'll survive, we did." He laughed quietly, nodding. "So what now?" "Now," she said, closing her laptop. "We stop pretending." That night, as they left the building side by side, the rain had returned, gentle this time, warm against the streetlights. Adrian reached for her hand, and this time she didn't hesitate. It wasn't about protection anymore. It was choice, and as they walked into the city, neither of them looked back. Months later, the world had settled back into quiet rhythm. The glass towers, the boardrooms, the endless meetings, all the same, yet somehow softer now. Adrian walked through the office early one morning, nodding to the new assistant at the front desk. She was older, sharp, and didn't waste words. "Your 9 a.m. is confirmed," she said, handing him a file. "And your wife called, said to remind you that coffee doesn't count as breakfast." He smiled. "She's relentless." "Good woman," the assistant replied. In his office, the light poured through the windows the same way it always had, but it felt different now. A framed photo sat beside his computer. Clara, barefoot in their kitchen, laughing at something just out of frame. It wasn't posed, wasn't perfect, but it was real. Every time he saw it, the corners of his mouth softened. For a man who'd built his life on control, that picture was the proof he'd finally learned how to let go. Across town, Clara moved around their apartment with slow grace, sunlight trailing behind her. She'd traded office heels for soft slippers, spreadsheets for paintbrushes. The walls carried small signs of their story. Books they'd once argued about, a jacket he'd never bothered to hang, and a plant she insisted was thriving even though it clearly wasn't. She smiled every time she looked at the spot where his tie still hung over a chair. The phone buzzed on the counter. "Adrian, running late. Save me some coffee." She laughed, typing back quickly. "Only if you eat something real." It was simple, their rhythm, their shorthand. No grand gestures, no dramatic declarations, just two people who'd fought their way out of the dark and learned how to live in the light. That evening, when he finally came home, he found her sitting by the window, watching the rain. "You missed dinner," she said, not looking up. "Then I'll make it up to you," he replied, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "You always do," she murmured, smiling softly. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere far away, distant this time, no longer threatening. They stayed like that, the city humming below, the kind of quiet only two people at peace could share. And for the first time in either of their lives, forever didn't sound like a promise. It felt like a habit they never wanted to break. And that's how their story came full circle. Not with grand gestures, but with quiet mornings, shared laughter, and a love that learned to stay. Adrian and Clara didn't find perfection. They found peace. And sometimes that's even rarer. Because in the end, love isn't about who saves you. It's about who chooses to stay after the storm. What would you have done in Clara's place? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story. Someone out there needs it tonight.